Hey everyone, welcome to The Week in Doubt, episode 50. And I can't believe it's been 50 episodes already. We must be somewhere around the 1-year anniversary mark. Doesn't take a math genius, 52 weeks in a year. I put out one episode a week on average, so we should be right around there now. I don't know if I'll do anything special for the anniversary, other than let you know that I plan on doing at least 50 more of these. Once I reach the 100 episode mark, I might reevaluate things, see if I'm still making a difference, see if people are still listening, and then make a decision about the future of the podcast at that point. But before I go any further, I should stop to let you know that, as usual, today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at www.audibletrial.com/theweekindoubt. Over 100,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. All right, let's get started. So you probably know, if you're a regular listener, that I'm a fan of the online news show, The Young Turks. And I was getting caught up with some of the recent episodes and discovered the segment where the host, Cenk Uygur, was kind of weighing the pros and cons, or the positive and negatives, of Pope Benedict's papacy, because he too was talking about the Pope's resignation. And I found it kind of interesting, so I think I'll play that clip for you.
All right, so let us now assess Pope Benedict's upsides and downsides. A little unvarnished as opposed to the rest of the media. So in the sense that we'll actually keep it real. So first of all, giant negative, as I just told you, huge sex scandals exposed under Pope Benedict. Now, to be fair, he's not the one that did the sex scandals, and they happen to be exposed under him. They weren't necessarily committed under him. And as a positive, he actually set new guidelines to prevent abuse. Now, as a negative, he never punished the bishops for the cover-ups. Never, never. And by the way, before he became Pope, since 1982, he ran the office that was in charge of punishing the bishops for cover-ups. Never punished them, okay? And so in one of his books, he wrote about how, as the Pope, he is exonerating all Jews for killing Jesus Christ. Now, I find that hilarious. But I guess some people wanted to hear the Pope say it. He said, look, it's not all the Jews, okay? I read the Bible, and I read the history of it, and it turns out there was a lot of other factors involved, and you can't blame all the Jews. Well, thanks God for that. So that's a positive, though, and other popes had not said it, so that's good. On the other hand, he promoted sainthood for Pope Pius XII, who was the Pope during World War II, and a lot of people say didn't do much to help Jews who were getting massacred in the Holocaust that happened at that time. So, and by the way, the Pope also refused to remove a priest in Britain who was a Holocaust denier as well. So that didn't sit well with some groups, understandably so. Now, another positive, he actually wrote that the new financial order must be based on ethics, and he criticized the current banking system, and I think he's totally right about that. Downside is that there was a significant money laundering scandal at the Vatican where millions of dollars had to be seized, and you couldn't even use your credit cards at the Vatican for a while because Italy was so mad that the Vatican was not taking action to stop that money laundering. So, as usual, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Now, speaking of which, he was against distributing condoms in 2009, so that's another negative for him, saying that they had nothing to do with the spread of AIDS or preventing the spread of AIDS, which seems ridiculous, right? Now, the good news, in 2010, he changed his mind, and he was in favor of distributing condoms. That was only to male prostitutes, because that, of course, wasn't going to lead to conception anyway, right?
Okay, so there Cenk touched on a few different topics. The priest sex abuse scandal, the handling of finances by the papacy, the Pope's stance on contraception, all things that I've touched on a little bit recently on the show. I think what really caught my interest there was something I had forgotten about. Pope Benedict XVI proclamation that the Jews weren't responsible for the killing of Christ. I believe the technical term is deicide, literally meaning to murder a god. By the way, I believe Deicide is also the name of a death metal band. But anyway, I actually think, all joking aside, it may be one of the most powerful words in the English language. And if you're familiar with the history of religion at all, there's unfortunately a very long tradition of Christians blaming the Jewish people for the death of Christ. Sometimes you'll hear it in conjunction with the term blood libel, which not only concerns accusations of deicide, but also often involves other lurid and heinous accusations, such as the accusation that was thrown around a lot in the Middle Ages that Jews coveted the blood of children, specifically Christian children, and performed diabolical rituals which involved the blood of children. The idea of blaming the Jewish people for the death of Christ has never really made sense to me. Just generally speaking, the idea of blaming one race or ethnic group for the death of one individual, divine or not, seems to me to be asinine and unfair, to say the least. And it's interesting how people who embrace these anti-Semitic notions always seem to conveniently overlook the fact that Jesus himself was Jewish, his followers were Jewish, his disciples were Jewish, his mother, the beloved quote-unquote Virgin Mary, was Jewish, and 3 out of the 4 authors of the canonical Gospels were Jewish, with the exception of Luke, who is believed to have been a Gentile. Not to mention Paul, John the Baptist, all the Old Testament patriarchs, and the list goes on and on. Interesting how the Romans or ancient Italians are never really blamed for the death of Christ. But I guess as an Italian American, I should be somewhat grateful. But if people ever do decide to blame the Italians, I'll just hide behind my light pigmentation and say I'm Swedish. But anyway, I guess the Pope first made his announcement that he didn't blame the Jewish people for the death of Jesus in a book he had written entitled Jesus of Nazareth. I had read elsewhere online that the book had been entitled Jesus of Nazareth 2, which seemed kind of funny, like Jesus of Nazareth 2, this time it's personal or something. But according to the CNN article I'm looking at, it was simply entitled Jesus of Nazareth. And actually, this article is dated March 2nd, 2011. Jews did not kill Jesus, Pope writes in new book. The Jewish people are not collectively responsible for the death of Jesus, Pope Benedict XVI writes in a book to be published next week. And this is, of course, this is past tense. This was written in 2011. Many Catholics and other Christians blamed Jews for Jesus' death for hundreds of years, but the Catholic Church formally repudiated that assertion in the 1960s. Benedict underlines the new position in his book, Jesus of Nazareth, and this is in quotations. Who has insisted on the condemnation of Jesus to death, he asked in the book, referring to the scenes in the Gospels where the people of Jerusalem demand that Roman governor Pontius Pilate have Jesus crucified. The Gospel of John says the people in question were the Judeans, but the Pope says the term, in quotes, does not refer to, unlike the modern reader may tend to interpret, the people of Israel as much, and doesn't even have a racist connotation. Far from meaning all Jewish people, Benedict writes, the circle of prosecutors pursuing the death of Jesus is the aristocracy of the temple or the priesthood. Even that is not without exception, he adds in the book, excerpts of which were obtained by CNN. So reading those excerpts actually makes me like Pope Benedict a little bit more. I actually think on last week's episode, I did grudgingly admit that although I don't think he deserves any added respect in the sense that people claim he's God's representative on earth, and my view as a non-believer is he's just a man, I did grudgingly admit that I did respect him to some degree as someone who had devoted themselves to the contemplative life and to scholarly pursuits. So I think judging by those excerpts, he sounds like he is, at least in regard to some topics, an intelligent and enlightened thinker. But that doesn't mean I'm about to excuse him for his views on gay rights, his views on contraception, and of course, last but not least, his part in the cover-up of the sexual abuse of children by members of the clergy. It's interesting, online, I did find this kind of concise list of proclamations made by past popes concerning blood libel and the idea of the Jewish people being responsible for deicide. And in fairness, it seems to kind of go back and forth. As early as July 5th, 1247, supposedly Pope Innocent IV took action against blood libel and issued a mandate to the prelates of Germany and France to annul all measures adopted against the Jews on account of the ritual murder libel and to prevent further accusations of Arabs on similar charges. But then, unfortunately, Pope Benedict XIV wrote a bull, Beatus Andreas, on 26 February 1755, in which he does not express any doubt concerning the murders of children ascribed to the Jews. He states they are perpetrated out of hatred of Christ and out of hatred of the Christian faith. And then a somewhat more enlightened pope, Pope Gregory X, in the 13th century, issued a letter which criticized the practice of blood libels and forbid assets and persecution of the Jews based on a blood libel, unless, which we do not believe, they be caught in the commission of the crime. Then in the 16th century, St. Pius V, in a bull Hebraeorum Gens, I think, did not reference blood libel, but he did make multiple accusations against the Jews, including usury, theft, receiving stolen goods, pimping, divination, and magic. And then Pope Paul III released a papal bull on the 12th of May, 1540, and made clear his displeasure at having learned through the complaints of the Jews of Hungary, Bohemia, and Poland that their enemies, looking for a pretext to lay their hands on the Jews' property, were falsely attributing terrible crimes to them, in particular that of killing children and drinking their blood. So you can kind of see there that some popes, in fairness, were more enlightened than others, and that the pendulum kind of swung back and forth concerning the papal view on blood libel. And some of the accusations are so silly and lurid that, I kind of chuckle while reading them. But this is obviously very serious stuff. And I think some scholars rightly argue that this type of thinking could in part have laid the foundation for the Holocaust. That for centuries, these ignorant anti-Semitic ideas had been promulgated and had kind of primed Western Europe for the Holocaust. But on that less than cherry, perhaps even lugubrious note, I'll call this episode quits. So once again, thank you for listening to The Week in Doubt. As always, you can like the Facebook page, you can subscribe or rate the show through iTunes or Podbean, and you can even visit the Week in Doubt YouTube channel to see some video uploads of past episodes. Basically just the same audio you've already heard, but accompanied by some basic visuals. And before I close things, I'd like to apologize. If you're hearing something that sounds like static, it's not static. It's actually the New England rain. I have a very sensitive mic. But anyway, so any support is greatly appreciated, and thank you.